Hello and welcome to Session 9 of MarSec21 where we'll be taking a look at vessel and port facility cybersecurity. Rick Tiene is back with us today. Rick, in case you missed Session 4 yesterday, which you can always catch up on the recording, but Rick is the Vice President of Smart Cities at Mission Secure, and he's one of the leading advocates of greater security of OT systems as they become more integrated with IT. Joining this session is Weston, also from Mission Secure, and an ethical hacker with over a decade of pen testing and 14 years of cybersecurity research and programming. And Rick and Weston will be joined later on by Julian, who is also back today. Julian is the global senior partner at international law firm Ince and widely recognized as an expert in cybercrime and cybersecurity, on top of his expertise in the shipping and maritime industry. First up, we have Rick Tiene, and I'll hand you straight over to Rick.
Thank you, Simon. I'll actually keep things very brief because Weston has lots of fascinating content to cover, and I'll just sort of try to set a framework here to help guide the discussion. The main focus we're going to be talking about is the vulnerability of maritime systems from the hacker's point of view. We'll talk some about IT, and certainly that comes into play. But I think it'll be most interesting to you because we all have some familiarity with IT issues in risk of cyber. But OT is really a newer field, and Weston is an expert in both. But I always find it fascinating to hear him talk about some of the approaches that he takes in looking at a target system and then what he can do with it. I've often likened it to the movie Predator, which probably most of us have seen, and whenever I talk with Weston or one of his counterparts on our ethical hacking team, I sort of feel like, you know, in that movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jesse Ventura and whoever, I can't remember the character, Apollo Creed's character or whatever, you know, we're all looking at the jungle and seeing the jungle. And then in the movie, you switch to the predator's point of view. And you see, as one person interjected when I was giving a speech once, the predator just sees the meat. He just sees the targets. He knows exactly what he wants to go after. And I always get that feeling when listening to Weston. So I'll turn you over to him. But first, just a very brief explanation for those who may not have been in the other session or had a briefing on OT versus IT. We're all familiar with IT cybersecurity. That's the laptops and servers we're all talking over here, and the email and everything we deal with every day, firewalls, all that. OT is technology that actually, in most cases, physically moves something. Not in every case, but, you know, opens and closes valves, will change the speed on your maritime engines or the rudder position or the ballast or anything like that. And that technology used to be very rudimentary. I used to be a guy who turned a valve, and then it became technology, and more that technology has become more and more sophisticated. And now it's at the point where it actually is vulnerable to hacking. And the hackers are more and more realizing that as we have done a good job of beefing up our IT defenses, we really left our OT as maybe the easiest and best way to damage us. So with that, I will turn over to Weston to talk a little bit about his experiences, particularly in maritime, but maybe with other OT systems, and some of the vulnerabilities that he's been able to help us identify and protect against. Thank you, Weston.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. And yeah, there's two cases that come to mind. Both of them were occurred on ships, and one of them included the home office of the ship. So that first instance of it was, I remember we were out of the United States. It was at a customer's home office, and they had me hop on the guest wireless network. And basically from that point, I was able to hack into the phone network, then back into their IT network, and then out to the actual ships. And from that start to finish was probably less than 2 hours. So, and that was one of the times when I was able to access, you know, from the home office over the actual satellite connection. And that included, you know, misconfigurations of voice over IP phone systems, VLAN hopping from having outdated routers and things like that. So it came down to a little bit of the IT infrastructure, but a majority of it was, you know, having those as two cohesive environments still. It was something where you're able to bridge into other environments. So, and the other one, it's amazing how many times wireless instances come up. There was one ship that, you know, they thought they had everything locked down, and it was one of the more locked down vessels we'd seen, but there was an actual print share in one of the actual helms of the ship. And it was an off-the-shelf wireless router. We used an exploit that was custom crafted to basically trick it into connecting to that access point, and an otherwise air-gapped network had actual access pushed into it. So something where I'm using printers, wireless access points. There's been several instances where it's just been, an unpatched system or actual network misconfiguration. You wouldn't believe how many times they don't even know, customers don't even know that they have these wireless access points on printers. And one of the examples, it was at a power plant, once again out of the United States, and we had actually hacked into the printer and turned the printer into a USB keyboard by flashing software onto it. So it became the printer was misconfigured, had its was out of date, so that led to that actual software being pushed onto it. And a lot of people don't know that wireless keyboards and mice and things like that can also be exploited. That was one of the scenarios. It was that customer that was very, very locked down. They had a good security otherwise, but a couple wireless mouse and keyboards, which are known as human interface devices or HIDs, and I was able to basically connect to a mouse on one of the PLCs, the program logic controller, like environments, which was the actual propulsion systems for that ship. And I was able to actually, since it was a generic HID device, I was able to actually send keystrokes through a mouse. So, and it was something that, it's just, people don't think about those kind of things, but those are the kind of exploits and attack surface that the average attackers will take into consideration. So, and was there anything else you'd like me to dip into, or?
Well, certainly, love to dive deeper. I mean, we run into all these scenarios. I mean, one of my favorites was at the office. We were talking one time about a system that we were working on for a customer, and it actually had a pretty interesting old school defense in that it literally in the traffic world they have these things called conflict monitors that have literally diodes that they cut the connections in certain directions, so that once the traffic light is configured, you can't do what you see in The Italian Job and other movies where it goes green. But we're talking about ways to defeat that, and we've come up with some interesting ones. But one of the funniest to me was in a discussion where we were talking about timing, and could we fool the light into going green by strobing? Going green and blank in one direction and blank and green in the other direction. And there are certain timing rules in a traffic system that would prevent that. And I just got a kick out of one of the other people on our hacking team was sitting in the corner, I didn't think really paying attention to this conversation. He suddenly piped up. It reminded me a bit of the scene in Jaws where the captain scrapes on the chalkboard. He just suddenly spoke up from the corner of the room. Well, all we have to do is change the controller's perception of time. And then they just went back to what he was doing. And to me, that's such a classic example of a hacker just seeing an incredibly obvious, incredibly simple thing that just we don't tend to think of. And that's why when we talk about cyber defense, you really have to just keep I'm sorry, Weston, scary people like Weston in mind, because they're coming at your system in ways you wouldn't have envisioned, and most likely, Weston, we just love hearing some of the stories. And why don't you talk a little about some of the tools that you use as a hacker? We don't want to get too technical, but just so that folks understand that there's a variety of things. This isn't just like the movies, and a little about your process. I think people have this idea in movies. Again, you pull up a keyboard and you start, hacking away, and there's somebody on the other end hacking doing a defensive hack. And I always joke, apparently one of them somehow looks like Angelina Jolie, which, no offense, Weston, I haven't met anybody in the hacking world who looks like her. So just talk a little more about that process. I think I always find, I hope the audience will too, I always find it kind of entertaining. And very
a lot of the tools, it's amazing, because I started hacking things back in probably 2003, and there wasn't a lot of tools. Everything was homebrewed, homemade. And a lot of the tools are specific to the industry. I'm having to make from scratch, or I have a small community of friends and coworkers that we, help develop some of those tools, obviously keeping close eyes on them and things like that, but not released to everybody. But it's something where, I have automatic detection tools for that crack attack, which is that wireless attack that I was talking about. It's basically where it will trick it into letting it onto the network. It's just saying, hey, I'm coming from another access point and I want on here. And that's a custom developed tool, but it was built off of a proof of concept on the internet. And there's several POCs, as people call them, on the internet. And a lot of the tools involve, first, when I get on site, I will look for open ports. I've had a couple instances, where they didn't have a negotiation for access. That was one of the bigger ones that'll stick out once in a while, but actual scanning for wireless. And then if I can, get onto the network or brute force passwords or use wireless attacks, that's one of the methods to get on, aside from just plugging into and then tricking it into thinking it's a phone or something on the network. After that, it's just kind of picks up a basic pen test where it'll, do scanning, but it's a little more sensitive since you're dealing with industrial control systems. It's everything has a little bit of a touch or a swing to it. So it's not anything off the shelf. And like with a lot of it, like I was saying, like a lot of these tools we had to build from scratch. There's nothing that really, attacks an Allen Bradley, so-and-so, because they only show up in industrial control systems. So it's something where like a lot of these are being developed from scratch. And like that exploit for the printer, I actually wrote that while I was going through the Panama Canal on the ship. So yeah, that was a fun instance of it, but it was off of a remote code execution exploit, POC. It was a proof of concept that was off of GitHub. So it's amazing the availability compared to in the past of, how you can get these exploits, you can build them. Obviously reviewing everything, if it's not made by me, I don't trust it. So that's a lot of the hacker mentality. Definitely looking into the software, where it came from. And yeah, just using some of the tools. It comes down to Metasploit, which is one of the larger exploit frameworks. So it's amazing, because people think that it's a very intricate process, and it still is to an extent. But it's something where a lot of the off-the-shelf tools are getting pretty good, where it lowers the bar for the attack surface. Yes, it is more of some of the advanced attacks I was talking about, especially for customers that have things a little more locked down. So it's something that is definitely interesting to look into. So.
Yeah, and with the referring to the customers being a little more locked down, one of the other printer stories I like, and I don't remember if you were directly involved in this one, but I've heard the story internally of a customer who actually had about as close to an air gap between their IT and their OT as we found, but it wasn't, and we ended up finding out for them where the problem lie, and they had actually done a pretty good job of separating their IT and their OT, and their designs showed that their IT and their OT were completely separated, and they were relying on their design. But the real world, things happen, and what we ended up discovering was, I'll give you the short version of this, but that a worker working at a SCADA station, working on an OT system, had to regularly print a report, and the printer that he had to print to was like at the other end of the building down 3 floors. So he had to get up, once every shift or every hour or something and go get the printout from there. And it annoyed him because in the room he was in, on the other side of the room, was a printer. Of course, that printer was on the IT network. He didn't really give that much thought. He was clever, and he figured out a way that he could print from his workstation on the OT system to the printer on the IT system, thinking he had just made his job more efficient. What he didn't realize was he had just connected the entire OT network to the entire IT network and bridged that desired gap. So things like that are another reason why we always stress to people that you really need to ensure that you're not just looking at what you've designed, you're looking at what actually is. And that our technology helps them do that, to really go and look at your network from the inside out as it's operating today. So when we do assessments, that's one of the first things we show them is, well, here's what your diagrams show. Here's what's actually happening. And there are almost always differences between those two. Weston, let me throw one other question at you. Well, actually, Julian, I wonder if you had a comment or a question, then I've got one other suggestion for Weston.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, Weston, yesterday, Rick and I were on with Simon, and one of the questions that Simon asked me was something that Rick and I come across a lot when we're talking to customers, which is, this is Project Fear. I'm not exposed. I've got the systems air gapped, or a lot of my OT, it's analog, it's old, it's an older ship. Even if somebody did hack me, I'd just take everything back to manual operation. You guys are talking about this risk. It's not a real risk. What as somebody that can actually take control of a vessel, what would you say to somebody that said that to you?
Yeah. There's no such thing as old in protocols. All that old means is that the normal stuff I do just doesn't have encryption on it usually. So it just makes it a lot easier. And it's definitely something where I have yet to see an environment where there wasn't at least a little bit of room for improvement. And like I said, all it takes is one of those instances of those wireless keyboards and mice. Like that was a very, very, very locked down environment. They dotted every I, crossed every T type scenario. And it was something like a wireless keyboard that somebody had brought from home, or even if it was procured through their purchase process, it led to that risk and that attack surface they wouldn't have even known about that kind of stuff. That's something that I heard at a conference like 2 years ago. So, you know what I mean? And I just happened to have the radio equipment built into my laptop at that time to be able to test for those frequencies. So, and that's another thing too.
So if I'm a crew member and, you know, I'm in my cabin, it's a late shift, and I decide I'm going to, you know, spend my few hours that I've got off playing video games on the laptop I've brought on board, which has got a wireless keyboard with it, am I then potentially exposing the entire vessel?
It depends. If it definitely it's been port for some of those frequencies that those keyboards speak. I've successfully snooped and done that about the range of about a quarter mile. So, I mean, yeah, it does become a Faraday cage on the ship a little bit, but yeah, depending on where they are on the ship, it can actually, you know, in fact, that laptop and then that USB goes into a computer for a report or something along those lines. So at some point, it does open up a little bit of the attack surface.
And Weston, following on to what Julian said real quick, and then I've got another question for you. But, you know, we see all the time, we do talk with people who are, you know, very sure that they're not at risk. One of my favorites a few months ago was we were talking with someone from the operations department of a maritime company, and he had promised to have the CTO at the meeting, and he said, well, he can't come, but he's assured me that, you know, we really don't have this risk because nothing's connected to anything else, and it's all independent and everything. And he went through and he's very adamant about it, of course, and it's tough because he's just relaying this secondhand. So we really can't ask any questions that would, you know, clarify this. He doesn't know the answers. He's just saying that his CTO said everything's, you know, nothing's connected. And then he said something right at the end of the discussion. And of course, you don't want to argue with him, you know, really. But right at the end of the discussion, he said something about their efficiency in reporting back to headquarters and all. And I said, well, wait a second, how does that happen? He said, well, that goes through the captain's computer. I said, that does? And what about this? And what about this? Oh, yeah, everything on board goes through the captain's computer and gets reported back to headquarters. And here he spent an entire 45 minutes telling us that nothing's connected to everything else, and everything on the vessel is reporting back through the captain's computer, which is creating a huge single vulnerability. Weston, one other thing I've always found interesting, again, in the way that many of us might not understand the way hackers operate. I think we tend to think of it as something that's sort of slipshod and goofy, and, you know, you come across something and you decide to, and I know that happens quite a bit. But for someone like you, who's a real, you know, professional hacker, ethical hacker, when you decide, and I think the same as your counterparts on the unethical side, when you decide to go after something you deem important, how much time would you say you invest, and sometimes how long is the process? I think you told me sometimes as long as months of research and getting into one part of it and then leaving it running and analyzing the data you're capturing, not doing anything. You know, this is not a, hey, I stumbled across this type thing. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, that's one of the processes too. Like, if there's a specific system I'm going after, like there was a session border control, which is a firewall for voice, and that took me 200 hours of exploiting and programming and to, you know, actually build an exploit from scratch. And that was actually submitted to the vendor. I go through the responsible disclosure process, so the vendor was able to patch that. But that's something that is very, very time intensive. There's been some, you know, like I said, 200 hours. That exploit, I had to write my own shell code. You know, because it was a proprietary operating system for that. So like you have to go into all these depths, you know, to build these custom, because everything has exploits for it for the most part. There's always a buffer or heat-based overflow for somebody to be able to exploit it. And on longer projects, you can actually, you know, end up reporting stuff to vendors, not only just customers, but it's stuff where, you know, instances of that have happened. And like I was saying, you know, on some of the longer pen tests I've done, or if I did like 4 times a year for a customer, it would be something where I was possibly able to get router password, but I didn't have the whitelisting for it. And I was able to find a whitelisting bypass for, you know, some sort of controls or things like that. So yeah, it sometimes takes months and years for people to be able to put 2 things or chain them together. But that, you know, that whitelisting chaining attack, like that, I ended up cloning out one of the cellular devices, which had a whitelisted IP address. And it's like, you know, that's what the extent that bad guys will do. So they'll clone out that cellular device and it'll end up, you know, being able to hit that traffic camera or that traffic system and be able to go in. And yeah, I think after I did the cellular cloning, it was 4 hours till I had domain admin. So yeah, so
yeah, that was a story in a different field, but a traffic system where Weston, from his sofa in North Dakota, which is right in the, you know, center part of the North American continent, really, a coastal state that we were working with on the East Coast had hired us to do some work, and Weston was able to find a cell signal between a cell tower and a traffic system that was out in the field, and fool the traffic system into thinking he was the traffic management center, and then turn around the next day and fool the traffic management center into thinking he was the piece of traffic equipment in the field. And as you said, in 4 hours of total work, all from his sofa halfway across the country, had the entire statewide network. These are things that we run into all the time. And Weston's also told me, stories in the past, things you don't necessarily think of as, and then when you hear them, they're completely obvious. One of the first things that Weston has told me he'll do is, when he knows what he's going after, just go online. Is the user manual for that device somewhere available online? Can you get a copy of that? Can you get, other things that are just freely available that then give him a picture of what it is that he's attacking? And I think most of us don't, have never really thought through the process of the level of professionalism that goes into, we obviously don't like unethical hackers, but to some degree you do have to respect this is not the goofball type stuff that we've sort of been led to believe in the movies. This is deadly serious, and they take it that way.
Yeah, and from some of the manuals, like if you look at the FCC details, it'll tell you what frequency this generator is speaking at. And we've had instances where, how'd you build a tool to be able to speak to that? And it's like, I read the manual for it. It literally says how you have to build the construction for the, the communications for that device and the frequency you need to speak. So we have like a software-defined radios. So those guys did not even know that those diagnostic systems for those engines were even talking on the ships. And that's something that that's not wireless. That's not, Bluetooth. That's not even Zigbee. That was a proprietary frequency that was only specific to that engine.
Thank you. Yes, this is fascinating, Weston. I do have a few questions that I'd really like to ask, because what I'd like to know is really what's the process if you're going to hack a ship. What is the step-by-step process that you would take? Can you talk us through that so that we can really understand what that is?
Definitely. So I've had a modified methodology that I've done, because I've done several vessels now, and it's something that after that first one, I took a normal networking methodology where you do scanning and service enumeration and fingerprinting. And I basically took it and spread it across the vessel. So normally you would just look at normal wireless networks, normal plugins, normal, wireless communications and things like that. And just basically took the approach of seeing what is specific to those industrial control systems and then adding that to the repertoire. So just adding that to the, the actual process I go through for that. So that's something that, starts out just showing up on the ship. As I'm walking through or being taken down to that meeting room, I'm noticing open ports. I'm noticing MAC addresses on stuff. I'm noticing if keys are exposed or things like that. And there's lots of methods that people could either do physically or virtually. And, if I notice a 5160 printer in the lobby, I know that there's an exploit for that. I know, from previous experience and things like that. So I'll go through, and if I know MAC addresses from wireless access points, I can do VLAN hopping. So I can go from guest networks or crew networks over to actual IT networks or to the actual ICS networks. So, and yeah, it's just a little bit different of an approach, but it still has that same methodology where you basically probe, find out what's there, and then take that information and from that point develop it into what further attack surfaces are there. So if I see that printer, I end up scanning that printer, end up probing that printer, testing the passwords, running exploits against it. And basically it's a version of scanning. So yes, I'll go out there and interrogate all the computers on the network once I have connected, but it's something where I also am interrogating wireless, signals and things like that while I'm actually on site. So, and that's one of the things too, is like when I say on site, I mean, yes, I am in a meeting room downstairs in the ship, but I could have done the exact same stuff from about a quarter mile away. And we've had a couple customers that had wireless satellite links. It was on some offshore oil rigs, but they use a lot of them on the ships too in some instances. And that line of sight or that customer premise equipment or that CPE device was misconfigured. And the only security it had was the frequencies built in. And that's the security through obscurity. That's one of the worst kinds of security there is, because that's where you read a manual and you find out what that exploit is. So yeah, it's just taking in all you can when you're on site and building an attack surface, and then checking and probing those attack surfaces for exploits. So,
and on the back of that, what kind of control could you take of a vessel?
Well, it's a matter of time once you've actually gained access. So say, for example, if I take over a desk phone in the crew network or something like that, and then eventually, that's the thing, like we were talking earlier with Rick, like there's a slow game where I can actually build in a wormable exploit for some sort of connectivity back to my VPN or whatever I would like to send that data back to. So basically what I'll do is I'll establish access at any level I can, and then I'll basically sit and wait for some sort of exploit to come out for some of the other stuff, if I was a bad guy type scenario. But with the other instances of it, it's just a little bit different process. So
wormable exploit is now my new favorite word.
yeah, wormable exploit just means that it can be used without any human interaction. So normally you have to click an email or you have to do something terrible, but like with the, a lot of the findings we find, they are RCEs, which are remote code executions, and they're wormable, which means that they literally are out on their own. All it takes is an internet connection to that device. And that includes a crew bringing an affected device in. A lot of the phone malware is now heterogeneous for, multiple systems. It will work on exposing, once it connects to the wireless, it'll actually exploit some of the other devices on the network. And that's 2 years ago wasn't an issue. You know what I mean? Some of the segmentation methods are now becoming legacy systems. So, yeah.
So Weston, from that, is it possible to take over? Is this something that you've been able to do, to take over navigational systems, take over ballast control, some of the operational technologies that could really do harm to a vessel in its navigation?
Definitely. There's instances like where I look at what I could have done, and yeah, definitely there's 4 instances that come to mind where there were actual takeover of the propulsion systems. Could have done pretty much anything they did well at the helm, so of the actual ship or the controls of the ship. Also, there was some fuel systems and some cargo systems that you could have, done flooding to balance, or you could have tricked them into thinking they were empty, or you could have overlapped stuff and just caused a denial of service type attack. So they wouldn't have been able, because it's weird. Like if the ship thinks it's off balance, its propulsion will not work. And if you're in the certain kind of canal, or if you're in a certain type of water, that can be intentionally used to either clog up the canal or to, cause piracy and things like that. But that's something where those ships and those examples, it's definitely something I've come across in the wild. Like there are examples of debriefs and meetings where those were the deliverables, were, examples of how those propulsion systems were actually taken over. So, and like I said, it stops once we get to the propulsion systems. It's not something we do intrusive testing. So I didn't prove to them that I can make it go left. I just, screenshot the HMI where it shows all the valves and everything like that. And it shows that I have a control of it. So
yeah, one of the tenets of ethical hacking is you have to know where to stop to make sure you haven't actually done any damage or terrified people too much. But we can then show what could have been done.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, I think, and if I could ask you this, Julian, I think this is possibly your specific area, because I know that you've participated in a number of global anti-terrorism forums. But do you see, or do you perceive a growing threat of terrorism in the maritime cyber field?
Yes, absolutely, Simon. Indeed, a number of the forums that I'm fortunate enough to be invited to speak on, which are international governmental forums where I'm dealing with national security agencies, they are extremely concerned about the rise of a terrorist threat to the maritime sector and through cyber. And again, we spoke yesterday a little bit about this when we were talking in our session yesterday. If I, whether or not I'm a hacktivist, I'm a terrorist, I'm a geopolitical activator, you can do so much harm with a vessel. I remember when 9/11, the tragic events of 9/11 took place, there was a gas carrier in New York Harbor at the time that the planes hit the Twin Towers. If one of the planes had been taken and targeted on that gas carrier, that would have taken out New York. The chance for a terrorist to use a maritime asset as a weapon is what keeps me awake at night. And I think we have a real threat. And even if we're not looking at that threat of using a maritime asset as a weapon in that sense, look at something like, or there's no evidence that this incident was as a result of a cyber intrusion, but the Ever Given closes the Suez Canal and has had such an immense effect on the global supply chain. Well, whether I'm a terrorist, whether I've got a political aim, whether I've got an industrial espionage aim against a company, let's shut down Suez. Let's shut down Panama. I think it's a real issue. And for what Weston's answer there to me was just underlying all the things that I've been scared about. You have a pilot on board a vessel in circumstances where you want that extra security of the pilot to make sure there's safe navigation. And here I have Weston saying to me at that crucial moment, because I've been infiltrating this system for a while, I can take over control. And so in a matter of seconds, and that's, I think, this answer to when people say, oh, but you know what, if somebody hacked, we'd just go back to our manual systems. You're not going to have the time, because within a matter of seconds, Weston's took control of the helm and done something which is disastrous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you don't mind me adding just a very brief point, that's one of the reasons why, again, people's misunderstanding and largely through movies and old things of hacking is this idea that a hack is something that happens, generally at the point at which you're being hacked, you've been hacked. These days, it tends to be an instantaneous payload that was planned in advance. And when it reaches what's referred to as 0 day and goes off, you're already fighting uphill. It's not that, so that's all the more reason why we think it's absolutely crucial to have a real-time cyber defense platform, not just awareness, actual cyber defense that can try to block the attack before it starts.
Rick, do you think are attacks becoming more frequent, and also, Weston, are they becoming more difficult to deal with?
We certainly saw in Julian's presentation yesterday, we've seen a 900% increase in attacks on operational technology in just the last 3 years. As we discussed in yesterday's meeting, I describe it as the cyber house, right? That we've done a good job of protecting our house, our IT, but most customers are way behind the curve on protecting their OT. And I joke about that being a garage, And so the hackers are more and more recognizing that this is very fruitful territory for them, either as a way in or as a point of impact, or both. And so we're seeing that really ramp up. I think Weston has even told me that his counterparts in the field have really started to shift their focus, which is not to use too many analogies. I think of the ISR starting to turn towards the OT instead of the IT, and that getting even scarier. Well, Weston, I'll let you add on to that regarding the frequency and the impact of these operational attacks.
Yeah, definitely. It feels like a few years behind. It does feel like 2003-ish, with some of the OT networks and things like that, and the actual attack surface and the complexity. So right now, it is a lot easier to attack OT infrastructure or industrial control systems, just because of some of the legacy systems or the life cycles on them are a little bit older, or they have reliability on out-of-date operating systems and things like that. And I would say over the last 4 or 5 years, it's a 900% doesn't surprise me. That's definitely something where, and the expertise out there, it's every time that there's a loss of jobs of programmers, malware shoots through the roof. So it's just funny or not funny, but it's interesting that, like in 2008, you see the recession, a bunch of out-of-work programmers, a lot of them were based out of Eastern Europe, and like that area is especially a little bit harder hit and stuff like that. And it was just interesting to see all these malware developers and exploit developers. And like I said, a lot of these systems are limited, 133 megahertz, little PLC in a wall somewhere on a ship. That's a lot easier to hack because it is a simplistic operating system running on it. It's not a complex, Windows. And Windows 10 has actually stepped its stuff up a lot. I remember Windows XP, I could write an exploit myself, like in those back in the days, in like a day or a couple hours or something like that. And now with some of these more complex systems, they have all these methods to stop this exploitation. So it's getting more complex, definitely on the IT side. And I think we're in the early days, the 2003 or 4-ish, for an analogy of it, but or an analog of it, it would be something that it was definitely in the early days for some of the IT stuff. And we have a lot of growing pains to go through with it, but it's something where yeah, exploitation is becoming harder. You used to be able to have one person, now it's entire teams of people developing exploits. So the complexity can go up, but you have to add more people to the solution is all. So if you're the bad guys, of course. So.
And even on a vessel, where Weston talks about the fact that, a lot of the Windows capabilities have become much harder to exploit on Windows 10, that sort of thing, we'll find on an operational technology system on a vessel, we still find a lot of Windows XP and older systems like that. And so even some things you think of as IT on your vessel, what we refer to as IT in the OT, that IT in the OT is almost always behind, out of date, because simply the nature of having to work with older OT equipment, you have to stick with older IT equipment that still is compatible with it. And so that creates another risk surface there.
Definitely. Yeah, a battery backup solution was one of the things that came to my mind. It was a pivot point into both networks, and it proudly displayed that when powered by a Windows XP logo on it. So,
and once you've actually got into a vessel system or a port system, how long can you maintain a presence there? What are the steps that would stop you staying in there for long periods of time?
Yeah, there's literally nothing. Some of it, especially with the methods, like I do a lot of reverse engineering or breaking down of malware to see how it works, and I pull the exploits out of it, see how they work, and submit them to vendors, or I actually build a tool that will help me in pen testing. And with all that interactions I've done, I actually learned to program because of viruses. I wanted to see how they worked and things like that. So when you take a look at some of the malware, there are very tricky methods of hiding that malware where it's almost invisible. And if you do it on a one-off solution, it's undetectable, like using heuristics for antiviruses and stuff like that. So that's why you need like a little bit more of a robust solution or layers of solutions to be able to capture malware. Because if it's something that only kicks on, at 4 a.m. or or when every week and a half or something like that, some of those are very hard to catch. And it's just something that especially with depending on what the system is, if it's custom developed malware, it's almost impossible without some sort of layering to be able to protect against it.
And Julian, you've talked earlier on about the need for incident planning and cyber response drills. How do you see these working in practice?
I'm a real advocate of this. I've been banging a drum about this because I think it's really important that we run drills so we know how to deal with the cyber attack. I remember speaking to the CTO at Maersk after the NotPetya attack, and one of the things that they said to me was, a lot of their planning didn't work. It's like, okay, let's activate the telephone trees. Oh, we can't do that because the telephone trees are on the system. The system's just gone down. Who knows the telephone number of the CEO? And of course, I haven't got it. I'd look it up on my laptop, but my laptop doesn't work. And there was who do you call? Do I call the chief engineer? Do I call the guy in the IT department? Have we got an OT guy? And of course, all that time, trying to scratch your head working out what are you going to do can be disastrous, financially, reputationally, everything else. And it's an issue that the industry have addressed for years now in relation to every other scenario. All the major operators will run live regular drills for fires, collisions, engine blackouts, cargo system failures, personal injuries, entries into enclosed spaces. It's all drilled out, and sometimes those drills are really complex. What I think we need to do is we need to do something with cyber, and I think that the way to do this would be to get a team that understands the legal implications, the business reputational implications, the cyber intrusion implications, and get them to work with a client and develop a cyber drill. And you could do that as a kind of, let's suppose this happened, this system went down. Or ideally, what I'd say is we work together with somebody like Weston and we say, let's do it. So we're going to say on this day, we're going to do something to the ship. And, the crew's aware of it. It's in a safe place, but we're going to do it. And then we're going to drill out, how do we react? and then do a lessons learned, work on a report on that, work out what the chain of command was, how we get the systems back up and running, and really start to become more effective. Because for me, it's it's what Weston does all the time. It's by looking at the exposure to these situations that we learn, and we can constantly improve. And of course, the hackers that are looking to infiltrate, I mean, they're working on this and developing all the time. What we've got to, so the attack, if you like, the attack force is really, really active. We've got to get a lot more proactive as the defensive force to be able to show that we can deal with these situations when they arise.
Thanks very much, Julian. And Rick, really what I suppose I'd like to finish on is really the question of what you would say or recommend to a ship owner to how do they start protecting their vessels?
Well, it's certainly, we appreciate how difficult it is to understand exactly where to begin. Again, hopefully they're already doing a good job on IT cybersecurity. Hopefully they're already embracing moving towards the IMO guidelines, and we can certainly help them with that. We have actually a complimentary readiness review for IMO that we'd be happy to do with any maritime customers to help them understand where they are in relation to IMO and the underlying standards on that. A lot of customers probably need to start with assessments. We love it when we meet people who feel they're already ready to move into defense, because you really want to move quickly. As we see things accelerating, you don't want to be analyzing this for the next year. You want to start defending your systems. That's why one of our approaches when we are working with somebody from an assessment point of view, we actually sort of blend assessment and defense a little bit. We actually utilize our defensive platform, which actually makes our assessments go deeper and be more effective and actually more efficient. Instead of just looking at your diagrams and interviewing your personnel and doing all the normal things you do in an assessment, we might do pen testing with Weston or others in our team that can do that. But we actually would recommend that we load, it's incredibly simple to do, our defensive platform on their network or on their vessel. And then we can actually look at their system from the inside. And what we always find is what we actually see is different than the diagrams. There have been changes that have evolved over time. And actually, one of the great advantages of that is, in addition to being a much more effective assessment and showing them that the traffic is flowing in ways different than what they expected and planned when they diagrammed it, we also are able to start showing them what defense would look like. And that really starts to blend, instead of, oh, we're going to do an assessment that's going to take 3 or 6 months to get the report back, and then we have to decide what we're going to do from a defensive point of view. And they're actually sort of blending, and they're starting to already look at their defensive posture during the assessment. We can even actually, with a mouse click, turn on certain defenses during the assessment phase. So I really like that approach. Obviously, it's the approach that we take, but I find it much faster and more impactful than more the traditional sort of assess, analyze, design. Now you're 14, 16 months down the road and you haven't actually implemented a solution yet. So we think we can help people really move much more quickly and effectively, not only towards IMO compliance, which is a great step on the way, but move towards actual, good cyber hygiene and good cyber defense.
And I definitely would agree with everything you said there. And I would take that approach to where you're basically wanting to take some of those best practices, you take those models and those frameworks and make sure that they're updated for OT and for industrial control systems, and just also take an approach and always have goals to work towards from a budgetary standpoint and just for an actual technology standpoint, always having a point to be moving to. If you're not moving, that's how you get 16-year-old patched systems. So I always recommend at least always have something in the works, or at least always have plans for them. So
thanks very much for that. And all that remains for me to say that was a fascinating session. It's always really interesting to talk to the people who have experience in the area, and it was a great pleasure to talk to you about that, Weston. And so, Julian, thank you very much for your insightfulness, and you too, Rick and Weston, thanks very much for a fascinating and very entertaining session.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.